tend to sometimes not be in designated posts. So you sort of see the balance of things. It starts with economics in a way. There's a lot of technical people in there, and then there's the social researchers at the other end. I used to work in Department of Culture, Media and Sport, which is and continues to be the smallest department in Whitehall, and there were only sort of 12 analysts in total out of the department of 500, so it was a third smaller, but had something like, I don't know, a tenth in terms of the analytical capacity. Perhaps another department was education I used to work in, where there was, I can't remember the numbers, but there was many more social researchers, quite a good army of stats on the education statistics, and it's probably more balanced, I think, overall in terms of the numbers. But certainly, DECC is quite unusual in the per policy head ratio of economists, and that's partly an issue of how it was formed originally, when it came from Burr at the time, that was business, I can't remember what they call regulatory reform was in there. Now it's enterprise, thank you, enterprise regulatory reform. They forgot all the social scientists, and likewise from DECA, they left them all there as well. So yeah, just kind of how it happened. But it's so we're proud that we're growing in strength, but there's still a very strong culture of economics.
Right, gentleman at the front, and then the back.
Question on the usability issue, which is a problem across a lot of technology, and I'm sure you're all learned something. The same in terms of finding my heating control system not the most intuitive to use. There's some progress being made. British Gas have introduced a web app, which is quite useful now. But what's the? It seems to me that's potentially an area of quite a lot of unrealised efficiency gains, which is very much in the social sciences camp. What's happening on that in terms of discussions with manufacturers, programs within DECC, etc.? Can you say a bit more about that?
Sure, yeah. Matt Lipson, who I mentioned before, is one of the social researchers who's leading on a fairly big program where we're looking at smart heating controls and looking to try and trial different kinds of approaches and get to grips with it in a way that's, as I say, much more multidisciplinary than it's been in the past, where it's often been led by sort of engineers, but to try and bring a range of different kinds of approaches to it. So we're very keen, David McKay's very keen to sort of get to grips with that, and we're working on particular projects. If you want to find out more in detail, I'll have to email me with that.
Right, flurry of hands going, but there was a woman back.
My name is Pamela Harling. I'm from Sustainable Harrogate. Last year we heard lots about nudging, which we somehow don't seem to be hearing about anymore. But do you see that as part of your job, to nudge us to do the right thing?
That's a big question. I mean, nudging, for those who don't know, it's come from a book that's basically behavioural economics, which is a variation on cognitive psychology, Daniel Kahneman's work, and it's mostly focused on things like how forms can lead you to get the right kind of answer, particularly in pensions and lots of boring things like that. As Dave mentioned at the beginning, I'm a neuropsychologist, okay? So the interesting thing for me is that everything is a nudge. The infrastructure, our buildings, the heating controls are nudges. The way in which they're set, if you set a heating control so it makes you think you should have it this way or that way, it will nudge you in that kind of way. So nudges are everywhere in that sense. So in a simple sense, yes. But my role particularly is to surface that as an understanding that we need to use it in a systematic way in order to help us achieve our goals.
I think the next one was Jenny.
Okay, so at the one hand, you've got people like me doing case studies where everyone's different. Yeah. And on the other hand, you often hear maybe technical people saying, oh, people do this, people do that with the heating controls, treating people as if they're all kind of one constant thing. When you're designing policies, how many different segmentations or sort of categories of people do you need to consider?
Yeah, that's the answer. Okay, so I don't design policies, first thing, but policy officials do that, and what we sometimes do segmentations. So you'll get these kind of consumer segmentations, particularly things like communicating some of these issues, and that's often then comes down to a statistical choice about the numbers of groups that are sensible to describe the range of differentiation in there. I know that's not quite necessarily the answer that you want, but I think for me there's a sort of, it's dangerous to go down the route of just trying to sort of design policy through a kind of social survey that then clusters people into a group and think that having done that, you need to do no more. In a way, it's a kind of starting point for a more targeted conversation. It's my kind of angle on that.
I think Richard was next.
Me? Okay. Hi, Richard Lorch. I know you're talking about DECC this evening, but could you just say a few words about the sort of bandwidth that social scientists at DECC have with perhaps their counterparts in Northern Europe and other countries? Do you exchange information and discussions?
I mean, if it would be anyone's job to do that, it would be mine. In terms of the social science community, I suppose. I don't know if you would necessarily more broadly, but in terms of the social science community, it would be my job to sort of do that. I'd love to do that more. I have a big enough job to just being in touch with the UK community, but certainly, I try to keep tabs on the international side of things. But it's obviously there's so much going on. It's intense. I mean, Matt Lipson, I keep mentioning him, but he went over to the Finnish conference, I think last year, and presented there. So it's not structured. It's kind of whenever it seems to be useful, we engage. I suppose.
Okay.
Gentleman next to Richard.
Simon Foxall, could you comment on sort of the role that your team sort of played in the formulation of something like the Green Deal, which appears to be carefully designed to put off householders from actually taking it up?
I had no input into that. I mean, the Green Deal had arrived before I did. In many respects, it was part of, I think, a manifesto commitment to some extent. And it's you saw the diagram. Policies get developed in different parts of the department. I'm in a science thing which is more strategic, so I don't link into that. They once they develop the teams and they develop the capacities, like social researchers in there to do certain things, but it's often following the policy. So that formulation stage, which is critical, and we're recognising it, we're changing internally about critical nature. And the DECC is a very young department, and it's still learning its the ropes in many respects. Even though, of course, many of us are civil servants, been in civil service for 10 years or more. So getting to grips with that process and to make it work better is something that we're working hard to do.
3 more questions. Right.
You talked about trying to infer when kettles are used from 5-minute data. Obviously, seen people trying to guess when people are on holiday from heating use. How do we go about collecting that data? Is there essentially different ways we get people logging when they're using the kettle and things like that? How does your green data set come together?
Well, this data exists. I mean, there are technical things that you put into people's homes for measuring these things. The question, theoretically, and in design sense, methodologically, whether or not it makes sense to get that data. Is it important? Well, we need to find out first, and then we'll see. Actually, we don't need 5-minute data for kettles for a year, kind of thing. But maybe we could have inferred that at the beginning. I don't know. But the point is that we can do it. But we need to really target on which types of data are most important. So, for instance, there's lots of sort of smart meters type studies, or studies that use smart meters as a sort of in the social sciences that use an energy measure, like these kind of in-home display type of mechanisms. But they focus on electricity because that's the easy one to measure. Gas, as we've seen, is much more important. It's also really hard to measure, but we can't step back from the challenge of measuring that just because it's hard. We actually need to focus on how we do it in order to do it better, so that we get the right data to do the right analysis. And it's an innovation question as much as anything else. And places like UCL that are sort of tackling these things head on, encountering the practical constraints of doing this on a day-to-day basis, are a place where we make progress. So that's kind of it's a kind of call to arms if there's anything out there. I don't have the answer to this.
Jason,
Thank you. Just picking up the point on the Green Deal and also the earlier point about nudging. You told us a lot of, I think, very interesting information about what people are actually doing and what is happening, numbers in households and so forth. But are you studying why people are not responding to an obvious need? For instance, insulating houses. Why is insulation not being taken more seriously by the householder? Is it because of economics of the materials? Is it because of the nuisance of having work done in the house? Is it because the contractors are useless and haven't got the skills yet? Are there other factors? From somebody in the industry, this is a very important question.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a very, very important question. It's a question that's coming to address in quite an ad hoc kind of way. So there might be some small studies, some social surveys that might ask people why they have or haven't taken up. I don't know fully the data in that particular area, but it kind of harks back to the fact that you look at every other government department and they have a vehicle for finding out those kinds of things in a systematic way. So when I was at the Department of Culture, there's a survey called Taking Part, which is 15,000 household survey data. Education has the same thing, to look at why do students do what they do? Why do people do the arts and or not do the arts in culture? We don't really understand, we don't have a systematic data set saying, well, why didn't you take up the insulation when it was free? You know, I mean, what really stopped you? Was it really the hassle, or was there something else? Was it your beliefs about builders? Was it your, you know, the energy's too cheap to bother? Who knows? But we need that. That's why I'm saying we don't really have enough of the data at a big enough scale. Particularly, there's lots of relatively small scale data studies, but we need to find that data. We need to do those kinds of studies. We're not currently, but you know, that your question points to the
yeah. It's the motivational studies. What actually gets people to change their behaviour?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's the sort of thing that's being done through the Green Deal in developing a better understanding there. And smart meters are also doing similar kinds of things, but it's very much in a by policy kind of approach.
Hannah Daly, I was wondering if you could talk through your interactions with your counterparts at the Department of Transport. Transport being the biggest energy end user and requires the same amount, if not more, interdisciplinarity with land use changes and things like that.
Sure, yeah, I mean, I have connections with the social researchers there. I think and I meet them not very regularly. I mean, you'll see that the social science panel we have is with DEFRA, not with DFT. As government departments, we face interesting challenges when secretaries of state change the emphasis of a department. And so, of course, if a department doesn't see energy or climate change as a priority, that sends a signal to civil servants about where they spend their time. And you see that bit with DEFRA, you see that bit with DFT, and of course that modulates how much we interact. So it's you know, we try to keep, as a social research community, in touch. And I'll see Ben Savage, for instance, at DFT fairly regularly, and we'll sort of exchange emails, but it's not as close a relationship as we have with DEFRA, for instance, and it's a closer relationship than we have, say, with CLG, which tells them other stuff.
Hi, I'm Anna Martin, Head of Public Policy for UCL. I was picking up on that particular point as well, about the interconnectivity of white-hot campus. Infrastructure UK sits now within the Treasury. Where does the Chief Social Science Advisor now actually sit? Is that still in the Treasury as well?
There isn't.
Well, there was an announcement that they were going to appoint somebody.
Really?
Yeah.
Today. No, there's been a select committee, I think, or one of these science and technology committees saying we should have one.
Okay.
And then we have chief social sort of heads of profession for the social research, which is currently shared by 2 grade 5, so the fairly senior social researchers in DFE, Richard Bartholomew, education, and EWP, Jenny Dibden. And they share the head of the professional service. So it's kind of a part-time role for them to do that. We used to have a sort of head of profession based in the Treasury some years ago, but there isn't anymore. So
the question is about the tensions with the Treasury and some of these things, these roles actually being brought into the Treasury. I mean, that's where I'm pointing towards. And going back to the 90 economists in DECC,
yeah.
and some of the arguments constantly being on the financial side and aspects. But what's your interaction with the Treasury in particular?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, as an individual, I don't interact with the Treasury at all because we're in the science side of things, so we're very much looking at the basic knowledge for energy. The people who interact with the Treasury are more the economists who work with policy officials who are developing things like impact assessments or doing spending reviews and that kind of thing. So yeah, I don't have much contact directly with the Treasury, but in past jobs I've had more contact, and it varies.
I'm mindful of time, so I suggest we take one gentleman at the back in the green shirt who had his hand up previously. We might then head upstairs and have drinks and nibbles, and you can corner Adam and keep going in. The gentleman at the back.
Can I go back to the smart meter issue? And there are too much information. Smart meters led by engineers, you get the situation where the engineers say, we've got to have this, that, we want all the information, we want to send it to their mobile phone, all this stuff. Can you believe it? Do they really think that people want information about their energy use popping up on their mobile phone all the time? Trying to persuade companies and engineers that people really want this to go on in the background, and that's a much better approach to things. There may be good reasons for saying to people, right, you want to look at your energy consumption now, but most of the time, people want this thing to sit away in the background and not to be bothered about it.
That's probably true for some people. I know that Ruth Retty, for instance, is at Kingston University doing studies looking at getting email information about energy use to people. And sometimes they're quite interested to sort of see their daily practices written out in the shape of their energy use over the day. And that can be quite useful as a starting point for people to think about, why am I using so much at this time? Oh yeah, I'm doing that. So obviously what tends to happen is that they start off quite interested, and then it goes into the background once they settle into a sort of
it's a learning
regime, into a new set of routines. And there's a moment of change potentially there. And that'll be more true for more people than others.
And the system can do that. It can start off with them saying, here's some information you might be interested in, and they can gradually calm down.
Right, I'd just like to thank Adam again for a wonderful talk.